Coming up right now, the newest episode from Carr, Gwyn, and Ode on Three Pagans and a Cat.
Welcome to Three Pagans and a Cat. We are going to be speaking with Jason Mankey. I'm Carr.
You may call me Ode.
And Merry Meet, my name is Gwyn.
I'm Jason.
Hey!
Which you probably already knew.
Yeah.
Probably guessed that one from the intro.
Yeah.
Yes, and we are very happy to
And the
have
fact
you
that we've
here
been
with
talking
us.
up this interview for like 6 years.
Yeah,
wow.
well,
Not that long.
maybe
I
not
only had a
hyperbole,
podcast.
it's a
Right,
thing.
but
I'm always just flattered when anyone wants to speak to me. That's still surprising.
I can understand that, but I mean, dude, you're like 4 books in now, right?
Oh,
or
more
actually
than that,
more than that.
7 or 8.
Because you've done...
And
4 out, 5 is already written,
Okay.
6 is due in April, 7 is due in December. I'm
And then
very
what-
tired.
Yeah, but you have such good information to share. That's why we're very excited, not only to talk to you, but to talk about this new book that you have out.
Very, very proud of this book.
Oh,
I've
you should be.
Spent years working on it. The 2-star review on Amazon made me cry.
Oh.
Don't ever read. The rest of them were
Who the
5s.
fuck gave you a 2-star review?
They were
Incredible.
anonymous. It's probably someone who hates me from elementary school.
They don't know what they're talking
He
about.
didn't pick me for the kickball team. You know, it's probably something like that.
Oh my god.
So why don't you give everybody just kind of a brief synopsis of who you are and where you come from and all that kind of stuff.
Wow. Okay. So I'm Jason. I live currently in Northern California in Silicon Valley in a little town called Sunnyvale. And if you are a Buffy fan, yes,
Yeah.
Sunnydale is based on Sunnyvale. And we actually know where the Hellmouth is.
Oh, very cool.
Before that, I lived in Michigan for a long time. In Lansing, Michigan. Those were my formative baby pagan years. I met my wife Ari there at Michigan State University. While we were at Michigan State, we did lots of college student groups and lots of covens and circles and rituals. And shortly thereafter is when I began speaking in public.
And one of those times was when I heard you actually in Grand Rapids.
Yep, in 2001, they had this little festival twice, in 2001 and 2002, and then never again.
Never again.
Never again, but it was sort of fun.
It was.
Had a
It
good
was
time.
great.
I'm a Gardnerian witch, so I'm initiated into a tradition, though that's not necessarily all that I do. 8 years ago, my wife and I moved to California from Michigan. She works in a medical laboratory and got a great job out there. And California's been fabulous for us. First of all, there's no snow, which is always nice.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
No negative ones, no negative 20s, nothing like that, which I know you all have had this winter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But what was it, negative 40 at one
Negative
point?
40,
It was
yeah.
crazy.
But I actually got time to write out there in California.
Nice.
I started blogging at a website called Pathos.
we all
We
read your blog.
Yeah. I don't only blog at Pathos, I'm the channel manager at Pathos. So
Yeah.
Nice.
I determine who gets blogs and
Oh, that's
argue
cool.
with my bosses for my writers and lots of those other things.
Right.
And since we've been in California, we've put together 2 covens. We have an eclectic coven and a guard coven.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
And so life is pretty sweet out there, witch-wise.
Awesome.
So that's the short story.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Now, what led you to start writing books? Did you just want to share this information with people, or did people say, hey, you should write a book?
You know, it's a boy and his dream. I kind of always wanted to write books. I tried to write a Horned God book a long time ago and kind of self-published parts of it. Llewellyn rejected it. I kind of put writing on the back burner. I don't really like writing. Writing is a means to an end.
Sure.
I like going to festivals and talking to people and doing workshops. And yes, it's really great when your book is done, but writing it sucks sometimes.
ya.
The process.
The process.
Yeah, I got really lucky with Llewellyn. I actually got asked by them to write a book.
Wow.
Okay.
Blogging
That's cool.
really led me to writing books. Blogging was an opportunity to really sit down and write 3 or 4 times a week. The more that you write, the better that you get at writing.
Right.
And I can see the improvement in my writing over those formative first few years blogging. You find your voice. Also, I think publishing has changed a lot. It used to be that writing in sort of an informal, the way that you speak sort of way was
Yeah.
not allowed in books.
Yeah.
The conversational sort of tone. But the online world has changed that. So now all of a
absolutely.
sudden, how I write is a little more acceptable. And they asked me to write the Athame book, which was the first one to come out. And then I proposed the other 6 now that I've either written or in the process of writing. And they've been really good and really supportive. Usually if I pitch them an idea, it's not too hard to get them to do it. And my books, I think I do a couple things well. I love writing rituals. I think most of my rituals are at least acceptable and passable into books. I also love writing about history, and I like writing good history. And for a long time, and especially in our witch and pagan books, we didn't get good history.
Right.
We got like pseudo history or history how we wanted it to be. Yeah, mythologized is a really good term for that. And a lot of these people weren't doing it to be like untruthful. Right. It was just what they thought at the time.
It wasn't malicious.
It
was just ignorant.
Right. Yeah. And thanks to Ronald Hutton, a lot of that came out, and we started looking at things a little differently.
That book really was kind of a watershed moment in '99 when it came out. And I remember I worked at Barnes & Noble at the time, and I saw this weird book on our inventory list, Oxford University, coming in 3 months. So I had, like, my special order already, and I might have been one of the first people to read that book, because the moment it came into Barnes & Noble, I was off to lunch, and boom, I've probably read that book 27 times and still use it a lot.
So for those of you who don't understand, Barnes & Noble was actually a place that you
brick
could
and mortar
buy a
bookstore.
physical
Book and
copy of
mortar
the book without having to go to Amazon.
You can still find them sometimes in malls.
It's funny, too, because back then, in the late 90s, Barnes & Noble had this huge magical arts section, which was the Wicca section. Yeah. Even in little tiny Lansing, I mean, a whole bay of books. And now you go to Barnes & Noble.
It's a shelf if you're lucky.
It's a shelf if you're lucky, and often mine aren't there, and then I cry. Inside, why don't you love me?
No loyalty.
I used to work for you.
Yeah, it used to be a great place to work, too, and then it, as the Amazon pressure became more and more, the benefits and stuff went to hell and shit, but that's not really what we're here to talk about.
That's true. We're here to talk about your books.
When you asked about why I write, Transformative Witchcraft was really this book about why am I writing this book. There are a lot of things that people do, especially in Wiccan witchcraft traditions, that are not explained. They're just written in books.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
One of my favorite for a long time was Build the Cone of Power. You would read a book and it would say, build the Cone of Power. Beyond that would be no instructions on how to build the Cone of Power, or what the Cone of Power was, or
how to even know if you'd accomplished it.
Is there a way to judge your success with building the Cone of Power? And I always thought that was like I was missing some great secret of witchcraft. I thought, wow, I've never done this. And I was walking with my wife one night, and I was like, are we ever going to build the power and build the Cone of Power in Coven? She's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, we never do that, right?
We just skip that step.
She's like, no, we do it every time. We're in circle together. It's when we raise energy, you doofus, And I was like, oh. Sometimes you miss what's right before your eyes.
That's true. And Ode and I were having this discussion this morning after having read your book. And I was talking about the fact that, back in the 80s, when a lot of pagan books were first being written by like Scott Cunningham, Shekinah Mountain Water, they had more information about some of these things. Like I read those books and learned what energy was and how to do it, how to create a cone of power and what that meant, kind of thing.
Well, and you had mentors. You had individual mentorship.
And I had mentorship. But I guess I internalized a lot of that information so that now I don't even think about it.
So when she was trying to teach me how to do some of these things, she didn't know how to explain basic concepts because to her they were just automatic processes.
They were just automatic. Yes, of course it goes in, energy travels in Deosil. Of course it does. And I didn't know how to explain that to her. And so that's what I really love about Transformative Witchcraft.
Your book.
Where
you talk about the reason you go Deosil through the circle is so that you don't interrupt the flow of energy. Was literally the first time I had ever had it like written down
and explained
that energy just moves that way. But then thinking about the practices I developed just naturally without instruction, yes, that is true. My energy moves clockwise naturally when I'm building energy. But it had never been explained. I'd never seen it written down before that this was just how energy worked.
Well, I've had to intuit like what Deosil and Widdershins
even mean.
Because
they'll just
can't you just say clockwise and counterclockwise?
It's just tradition now.
I know, but it's just funny that
I like clockwise and I like Widdershins, so I like just use whatever rolls off my tongue.
Works,
easier.
But that's what I feel like your book is hearkening back to the 80s, the early 90s, when a lot of those, when people actually explained a little bit more the mechanics of things. Because I feel like now a lot of books, like you say, they just kind of mention it, but they don't actually explain the mechanics of it.
Well, I grew up on those books too, and I thought they never really mentioned it. Maybe I need to be...
I really think she had a mentor who trained
that probably
her,
helped.
and I think she explained a lot of things to you that you think are in the books, but you just have internalized them so hard.
My reading comprehension might be bad. I could be totally wrong.
I just remembered, like, you have an exercise in there about how to recognize energy, and Scott Cunningham had that similar exercise, and it built from there. Shekinah Mountain Water wrote the book Ariadne's Thread, a workbook of goddess magic. That was my introduction to Wicca and witchcraft, and in there she had an exercise on how to build a cone of power, and she actually explained it step by step how you do that. Like I said, when I read that in your book as I was reading it, I was just like, holy shit, he's actually explaining it. That's awesome.
Because no one's reading Ariadne's Thread.
No, nobody reads that book. It was published in the 80s.
Yeah.
The walking clockwise thing is a big deal to me. In Circle, when I see somebody in my coven, just randomly walking Widdershind, all of a sudden I'm like, stop! Hissing intake of breath, glaring at them, and I do that in public ritual too. I'm like, how dare you walk that way?
See, no one's ever explained this to me before, right? Mm-hmm. So the contrarian in me has always read, you must walk clockwise and that never counterclockwise in a circle. And the contrarian in me is like, you can't stop me.
Yeah.
But now that it's actually been, the energy moves that way, so you move that way, so that you don't interfere with the movement of the energy. Like, now it makes sense, and I'm like, okay, I understand. Why not to just go counterclockwise, because I feel like being contrary.
We had a small amount of people show up to Coven last time we did ritual, and usually I don't cast the circle, we have somebody else. Usually like 2 or 3 people are the ones who generally do it. But that night I was like the only one who really was well versed in what we do and has all the ritual written in his head. So I uncast the circle and I had to walk counterclockwise. And when I was done, I was like, I don't ever want to do that ever again. That just felt weird and icky. And I'm done.
Yeah,
I'm done. That's why I make Mikey do it.
Yeah.
Mikey, whoever you are.
That's right.
We're sorry. It's you have the Widdershin's responsibility.
So we began this discussion with you saying one of the reasons you wrote Transformative Witchcraft was because you wanted to explain these concepts in more detail. And I really liked how you started with history and just, gave us this really beautiful history of Gardner and Wicca and witchcraft and
actually kind of dispelled some of the myths that are out there about Gardner too, which I thought was really cool because those myths get propagated over and over and over again.
Yeah. Exactly. And so and then it kind of naturally flows into the next part, which is talking about various, different kinds of ritual.
Yeah, this book is, I'm sure you're aware because you wrote it, but this book is very well put together.
Llewellyn does a great job with that and was really helpful with how to put it together, though I didn't really have to change very much at all. Sometimes after you send a book in, you have to rewrite large swaths of it.
Right.
I just had to add a few parts and check the quotes. The book was not originally called Transformative Witchcraft, though. Llewellyn has a lot of input over what your title is.
Yeah.
And it was originally called The 5 Mysteries of Witchcraft.
Okay.
And then my editor was like, are there only 5 mysteries? Is that what you're saying? There are only 5 mysteries? We're not going to call the book that.
Which is funny because, putting a number in your book is a big selling thing normally. You want it to say the 7 habits of, the Stephen Covey shit. The 7 habits of a highly effective person. Because that makes it so, because I want to know these 7 things. Yeah. So it's interesting that Llewellyn would be like, fuck that. We're just going to go with what it really is.
That's one of the reasons, now I think sometimes that opening history chapter feels a little odd because the other ones are so, experience this and do ritual and things, and the opening one is just this long story of Gerald Gardner. But it's a story that you don't see in a lot of, Llewellyn or Weiser books. It's something that's been confined to Ronald Hutton, who some of us, and I love the work of Ronald Hutton. If I ever meet Ronald Hutton, I'm probably going to faint, because I'm a fanboy. But some of us think he got some things wrong in Triumph of the Moon, and there's Philip Heselton, who went to the New Forest area and did a lot more digging.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of his work. He's done some really interesting.
He's done a lot of his work is very speculative. You know, there's no smoking gun that proves that Gerald was initiated in 1939, but he makes it a good case that it's very likely.
A compelling case.
Yeah,
right.
And most of that just hasn't been in these kind of books, so I wanted to put all of that in and include it.
I think that's important because we do need to remember what the what the roots of modern paganism, modern witchcraft are, and he had a large part to do with that. I think we can all say we're public as witches and druids and heathens and whatever, because Gerald Gardner was really kind of the first that said, "Hello, I'm a witch."
Yeah,
1951. I mean, that's kind of a watershed
changed, right?
moment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the witchcraft law being repealed really would have had much to do with it. I mean, people like to tell that story, like, now you can be legal. But the witchcraft...
And then they came out of the woodwork.
Yeah, but the witchcraft and mediums law was really just about fortune telling.
Yeah.
Right.
Which that's still illegal in many states.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's not like they were going to burn you to death if you had been a witch in 1948 or something.
You might have gotten a fine.
But the confluence of events worked out really well.
Right, absolutely. Although I do remember seeing just a clip of Gerald Gardner on British television when he was being interviewed, and the faces of those reporters were hilarious.
He was an odd-looking fellow, especially in his later years.
Yeah.
And I've also read things that he didn't bathe very often, so he's probably also an odd-smelling fellow in his later years.
So why did you feel it was important to include this then, since you did say the primary focus was these 5 mysteries?
First of all, I wanted to tell this story of Gerald, and as I said, I didn't think it had been in a lot of popular books. Second, part of it just comes from anger. When people call, like, when you're a Wiccan witch, and they say, well, you can't be a witch, you're a Wiccan.
Yeah.
You do Wicca, you don't do witchcraft. Gerald Gardner called himself a witch.
And it was the witch cult.
The witch cult. He practiced witchcraft. He never used the word Wicca with 2 C's.
Right.
He talked about the Wicca, which means the wise ones. Kind of like when you were initiated as a witch, you became a part of the Wicca. And that whole sort of harping on Wiccans and, bad-mouthing Wiccans just bothers me so much. I mean, because there's no need for it, and the people who do it, the traditional witches, they do great stuff. I mean, there's no need for us to fight each other. It's so dumb.
I think it started as a squares rectangles thing.
Yeah.
I think it was an attempt by some Wiccans and by some witches for some Wiccans to be able to say, like, I'm a Wiccan, I don't do witchcraft, and some witches to say, I'm a witch, I don't do Wicca. I think that was the original intent, and it got hostile somewhere along the way.
And it really is hostile sometimes.
Yeah, it really
surprisingly.
This is one of the things that just frustrates me sometimes about the pagan community is like, y'all, we have enough fights to go around. You don't have to start new shit.
It's like we like to look for new ones, and there's no need to look for new ones.
Exactly.
Please direct your aggression outward.
I think that's what makes our podcast just a tad bit different, is that it's a witch, a heathen, and a druid who happen to
all live in the same house.
All live in the same house, and at times do ritual together.
Yeah.
And so we incorporate stuff from all of our
paths. We have a very syncretic
thing.
Eclectic.
So it's,
mishy-mashy
right.
thing
so you get
happening.
to hear 3 different perspectives about whatever we're talking about.
Yeah. One of the things that I love the most about growing up as a pagan in Michigan, there were never enough of us that
to have like a dedicated
you couldn't do the same tradition with each other because there weren't enough of us. So you got to do stuff with all the different traditions and learn from each other and take from that. And now it's like everybody wants to go to their camp and they don't want to come out and play with everybody else.
I've noticed that, there's a resistance to eclecticism, there's a resistance to syncretism lately. Everybody's very tribalizing and forming up in their individual societies.
I'm eclectic. I've always been eclectic and a solitary. I've never actually, been in a coven or part of a coven.
Yeah, none of us actually. Neither Carr nor Gwyn nor have ever been part of a large community.
Right, but I have taken part in public ritual at events like this. I take part at Arts and Craft when Pat and Paul do their rituals. I'm like, what's the big deal? We can why can't we all just get along?
For the most part, I mean, we all come from many of the same sources.
Yeah.
Especially witches and druids. There's such kinship there and such bonds there.
Yeah.
Well, and, I mean, Gardner was drawing on a lot of, and then sources that followed Gardner drew on a lot of what remained of Celtic mythology and reimagined Celtic. The White Goddess, Robert Graves' book.
Right, and also the Margaret Murray.
The Margaret Murray is a huge deal, especially for Gardner. There's really not a lot of, or any Robert Graves in Gardner himself that came later. There was a traditional witchcraft group online, and they were like, neo-pagans use the White Goddess, which is hilarious because Robert Cochrane, the first person that we probably today would identify as a public traditional witch, heavily influenced by the White Goddess. I'm like, do you know anything about what the fuck I'm talking about? Heavily influenced by Robert Graves. But yeah, for Gardner, it really was Margaret Murray to a large degree, and then Margaret Murray really blessed the Wiccan movement, the witchcraft movement, by writing the foreword to Gerald's first book in 1954. Even though the witchcraft outlined by Gardner is only sort of like Margaret Murray, because Margaret Murray, there's no goddess in Margaret Murray. It's all about the horn god, and when there's a goddess mention, it's really, really rare and not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Now, I know that a lot of people kind of dismiss the work of Margaret Murray. In your book, she's a lot more important than people will give her credit for.
From a historical perspective, it's easy to dismiss the work of Margaret Murray. As an influence on what we do today, it's tremendous. Like, her work has really influenced people. I see bits of it in ritual sometimes. You know, I'm like, where have I seen that before? Then I go back and read The Horned God of the Witches, and I'm like, oh, that's from Margaret Murray. People take from that book.
Yeah.
Margaret Murray was the first person to really articulate the idea of the Horned God as this bigger figure comprised of Pan and Cernunnos and Herne. The God of the Witches is her better book. The Witch Cult in Western Europe, which came out in 1921, is better known.
Right,
but
I have a copy of that.
It's much shittier to read and not really very fluid, but God of the Witches in 31, the first chapter, which is about the origin of that horned god, by the time you're done, you just want to take off your clothes and run through the forest. I mean, it's tremendous. It's tremendous, and she paints this beautiful picture, and none of it's true, but it's so beautiful, you know? And
beautiful bullshit. And listen, listeners, there is a place in the world for beautiful bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
There's a reason why UPG is UPG.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Everything starts somewhere.
And if it works, that's all that really matters.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's value in knowing the history of everything. This is why I always do this on the podcast, is I always do all the debunking. I tell people, okay, look, here's where this actually came from. I'm not doing this to tell you can't worship the thing or believe the thing. Just know where it comes from, and then do it all anyway.
Exactly. Right. And there's, I would encourage people to read the work of Margaret Murray, because she,
Especially because I think you'll find that a lot of secondary sources are referring to Murray without referring to Murray.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
There's a bit that Heselton writes about that he thinks one of the groups that started witchcraft in the New Forest area were influenced by reading a review of Margaret Murray's books.
Oh, interesting.
So
not reading the actual book, but reading someone else's
opinion.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Witch Cult in Western Europe, when it came out, it was written for an academic audience, and nobody who was a layperson really read it.
Yeah.
And then God of the Witches was written for a lay audience, so that ended up kind of trickling down to regular people in a way that the Witch Cult didn't. But then after the war in the early 50s, both books kind of had a renaissance all of a sudden. Probably due in no small part to Gardner, because all of a sudden people are interested in witchcraft, and these are the books that do it.
There are only so many books out there, so...
Yeah. But, I mean, also, during World War II, there aren't a lot of people writing books, so people were going back and reading older things.
That's true.
That makes sense.
Now, I did want to point out that I really appreciated that I think there were two parts, or two sections in your book, where you mentioned a more openness non-heteronormative images of
high priest and high priestess.
Exactly.
And the Great Rite.
Much more inclusive. You have a very inclusive tone in this book, and I thought that was great, because we appreciate it because there's a lot of heteronormative influence all throughout Wicca, witchcraft, paganism.
Call it bullshit. Bullshit.
We have a transsexual son.
We
have a non-binary child. It's important to me to hear this inclusiveness being included, because I think that's been an issue in the pagan community.
It's getting better.
It's getting better.
I think we're ahead of the curve versus regular society.
Yes.
Yeah, I think when it comes to trans rights, we're like a generation ahead of other people. But we're so far behind as human beings in that area that we have such a long way to go, even if we're a little bit ahead. I think for a long time, and this is partly Gerald's fault, that people, when they talked especially about Wiccan witchcraft, it was a fertility cult. It's a fertility cult, and it's all about male and female raising energy together. And, he was a product of his time. I don't think he really understood gender like we do it today.
Right.
Sure.
People did not understand that gender is fluid. And, we even see it basically in everyone over 70 in our society. That's not everybody, I know that. There's some.
It is the overwhelming majority.
But there is a generation that doesn't seem to be able to accept that.
Yeah.
So I am, a part of a generation that accepts that, and I want my witchcraft to accept that, and it's important that my community accepts those things. And when I look at the Great Rite especially, if it's about fertility, it's failed so much, because I just don't see a whole lot of pregnant high priestesses walking around. I've never thought, let's do the Great Rite because I want to have some babies. Never. It's always actively trying not to have babies.
Right.
Taking pills, spilling our seed upon the earth, trapping it in latex, whatever it is. Definitely not about fertility.
Right.
So. Right. One of the things I really wanted to do with the book, and the last section is on the Great Rite, sort of look at sacred sex in history, and then sort of look at the Great Rite in a new and different way, and in a way that was inclusive of everybody. Because of what I see the Great Rite as, I see it as something that everybody can do. It's about connection. It's about connection with the partner that you're performing the Great Rite with, or, if you're really lucky, partners that you're performing the Great Rite with. Good for you, folks. And... but it's not just about that one partner. It's about connection with magical energy. It's about connection with the greater universe. It's about connection with the natural world and connection with the deities that we honor. And sex is such a altered state of consciousness that it opens up all of these opportunities for those things. And I'm really proud of that section of the book. I hope my wife never reads it because, it's embarrassing for her, I think.
I really appreciated that section of the book. The part I appreciated most, because I usually skip that section. Like, it's not really relevant to my life. But you had a little piece at the end, so I was really glad that I went through the whole thing, where you describe essentially a non-sexual Great Rite.
Yes.
Between two participants who sort of commune with each other, I guess. Is the best way to describe it in brief. And it was really, it felt really compelling. It sounded like something like I could actually participate in and engage with. So listeners, if you pick up this book and you, like me, are inclined to skip anything about the Great Rite, actually go through this one.
Yes, this one is
read this whole chapter, and then when you get to the end, that non-sexual Great Rite, I think, is really going places.
Yeah.
We have a lot of listeners who are LGBTQ. And we tend to discuss gender and sexuality and that kind of stuff quite a bit in our podcast because we have a trans son and we have a non-binary child. And so that's a big deal to us as people. And there's always been an issue when Ode goes to an open ritual where
the struggle is real.
Where they don't explain what's going to happen.
And there will be these secret gendered elements.
These gendered elements that they don't really talk about, but then happen.
And they'll just they just assume, they look at me and they make an assumption, a logical assumption, I guess, about what my gender is. So then I get spontaneously gendered in the middle of a ritual that I don't get to consent to because no one told me it was going to happen. So now I just go to ritual leaders ahead of time if I can track them down and I check.
Right.
Yeah. And
it's going to break your magic if I do this.
We're trying to encourage leaders in the pagan community to, without spoiling the ritual, obviously, if it's for open rituals, obviously not within your own groups, but for open rituals at least, kind of give a heads up or make it known that, yes, this is going to be heteronormative, or no, this is going to be a more inclusive kind of gendered
My question would be, because none of us are ritual leaders.
No,
we're all
we're
solitaries.
We're
coming at this from the perspective of, as occasional public ritual participants. This is something that would make it easier for me, the ritual participant. But, you lead rituals. So is this, does this put, an undue burden on you? Or does it destroy the mystery of the ritual? Or
the burden is not undue, because anybody who comes to a ritual should feel comfortable and welcomed at the ritual. The ritual should not exclude anybody. And if you can't write a ritual that way, then maybe you shouldn't be leading the ritual. And it's true, it's harder than it used to be.
Yeah.
Writing a Beltane ritual now is the biggest challenge of my year. It used to be, all right, whoever wants to chase the boys, and whoever wants to chase the girls, chase the girls. But, there's all kinds of pitfalls in that from my thinking 15 years ago. It's like, oh, this is fun. But now I'm like, this doesn't imply consent.
Right.
So I don't like that. What if you don't identify either way?
That's me. Who chases me? Nobody.
Are you just supposed to stand in the middle of the circle?
Observe.
Yeah. You be the timekeeper now. That's your role. So you have to rethink what you're doing, but you can still get to the mystery of why the seasons turn and what we're celebrating at any point in the wheel of the year. Certainly, magic can still be done. That's not going to change anything. So all of these things we can fix and we can do, and we can make ritual inclusive, and we can make everybody comfortable and happy in the ritual.
I'm really grateful to hear you say that.
Yeah.
It's really good to hear that.
As a Gardnerian, people are like, well, you people are never inclusive. If we removed the LGBTQ plus element from Gardnerian Wicca, there would be 60% less Gardnerians today. And that's the absolute truth. The new generation of Gardnerian leaders, we expect, we want a place for everybody in our circles.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. And since we've talked about, the Great Rite, can you list what the 5 mysteries are that you're covering in
the book?
Yeah, in the book.
So the first was Gerald Gardner initiated in 1939. Right. It's the hardest to make interactive, but it does have 2 cool rituals in the back.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, the 1899 ritual, which very interesting. I think I read about on your blog before.
Yeah, it's stolen from the blog. It's nice when you can recycle 3,000 words and make your book longer.
Recycling your own.
You're recycling yourself.
There's more information in the printed one, though. And there's also a Margaret Murray ritual in there,
that was also very
cool.
And the second is the Cone of Power. But it's not just the Cone of Power. It's about building a good circle. It's about ways to build energy. It's about ways to make your energy work more effective. And then it has a little bit of history about Gerald Gardner and what's called Operation Cone of Power.
That is
one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
The third one is initiations, elevations, and dedications. I think that's the best section of the book, and I thought it would be the most boring section of the book. It's the longest, I know that, but it talks about initiation in history. So, you do the Freemasons and the Golden Dawn and ancient Greece and those things. But then it talks about the elements of an initiation ritual. Like, you take an oath, or you go through a challenge, or you're asked to know something, or you're given a secret sign. And one of the reasons I like that bit so much is it touches on other bits of witch lore. Because you can use something like, as above, so below, from the Emerald Tablet, as a password, or as an instruction that somebody should know an initiation ritual. So then in the book I elaborate on that, and the witch's pyramid, which, to go, to know, and all those things. And the witch's 8 paths of power. And then, of course, there are initiation and elevation rituals that I wrote in the book. I think somebody reviewed the book, and they're like, and then Jason shares his Gardnerian initiation rituals with people. And I'm like, no! I pledge not to do that. They're my rituals that I've written in the book.
Right.
And they're better than the
He said humbly.
And since the Gardnerian ones are oathbound, you can't compare.
That's right.
You just have to take my word for it.
Yep.
So deal with it, bitches.
And then the fourth is Drawing Down the Moon.
Yes.
That is really where the book started, because I'd been doing a Drawing Down the Moon workshop for a long time. So I already had many of the notes already written. So I'm really happy with that section. But it talks about how people have dealt with deity in history, and if there are precedents to drawing down the moon, and it gives some rituals and some advice. And it sort of goes over the standard drawing down the moon ritual that you read in things like Janet and Stuart Farrar's The Witch's Bible, or Lady Sheba's Book of Shadows. And then at the end, the Great Rite.
Right.
And a really long acknowledgments section.
That was a great acknowledgement section.
It was, yeah. I even enjoyed reading the acknowledgments.
It was.
The first half was supposed to be the end of the book. Because, you want to end on, take this and run with it. And my editor's like, no. Just end the section. Then I was like, but I really want this in here, so... It starts the acknowledgments. Yeah. Well, now you're knowing the secret inner workings of Llewellyn.
There you go. All has been told.
Yeah.
Now, we also I like the glossary, too, because you give really good definitions for the words that, are standard in the craft, but a lot of people don't. Maybe if they're new, they might be unfamiliar with them. Now, I'm curious, is this really a book more for people who are involved in Coven, or can the solitary glean some information from it to use in their own practice?
A solitary, glean some information from it.
I know, but I'm asking the author.
So the book is really, about Wiccan witchcraft predominantly, though there are other things in it. There's little traditional witchcraft bits and stuff throughout the book. I think Wiccan witchcraft was originally meant to be done in covens. If you go back and look at the rituals that Gardner wrote, not that you can, but if you look at the early structure of Wiccan witchcraft, it was an initiatory group. And you were expected to practice in a coven of about 13 people. And I still think that Wiccan witchcraft especially works best that way. It's really... So a lot of these rituals are for covens and groups. However, most people today don't practice that way.
Right.
Most people are solitaries. And... what I want people to get out of this is that these are rites that they can do. They don't have to join a particular tradition. These rites are a part of our heritage, and people should embrace them, and that they're magical and transformative rites. And so I'm trying to open that doorway to anybody who wants to partake in those things.
Excellent. That's great.
So 2 good things you'll like from us. Well, one that you will definitely like, one that we'll find out. So, we all 3 gave it 5 stars.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please put that on Amazon.
And we will go to Amazon.
We will put
and
that
we will
on
put
Amazon.
it on Amazon.
Individually.
Go to Amazon.
Counter that 2-star review.
That's right. What on earth?
And then the other thing is, we really thought the book was, if you want to start a coven, here's how to do it.
Right.
It's like Coven 101.
That's really a part of it. I really wanted to give a roadmap for people who are in covens or starting covens to be able to do initiation and elevation rituals.
And you did.
Because I think those are just...
And drawing down the moon.
Yep.
And, because drawing down the moon especially is one of those things where a lot of the process is very arcane.
But it's really internal, and you really can't tell somebody how to do it. All right, now, open yourself up for deity and wait for it to jump in. It doesn't really work that way, but you can set up triggers. Ritual does help. You can kind of go over what you think the mechanics might be in your mind. It talks about, what happens when you draw down the moon, the different definitions or kind of ways people think that it might happen. So I really wanted to give people that primer.
That's very cool.
Because most people, if they are in a coven, it's probably an eclectic coven. And saying, hey, I'm going to write an initiation ritual is really challenging. I remember in our eclectic coven when I wrote our first initiation ritual, it was challenging. What am I trying to do with this ritual? What are we trying to say when people enact the ritual? Does it have any deeper meaning than, here's your Book of Shadows and a little something to wear around your neck?
Yeah.
I want it to be more than that.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is. And I also really liked how you stressed, I think, for instance, in Drawing Down the Moon, it's not about the person who becomes the recipient of the goddess. It's about the coven. It's about the people who are experiencing the goddess through this person.
That is something I've seen in ritual a lot, where somebody writes a ritual and performs the ritual for a group, and they want the glory of leading the ritual.
Right.
Look at the spotlight upon me. I've been to a lot of bad rituals, and that's the first thing that I see in a bad ritual, I want to sing a song, so I'm just going to sing a song right here. It has nothing to do with the rest of the ritual, but you're going to have to listen to me sing a song.
The ritual cannot proceed until I get appropriate applause.
Yeah, exactly. And look at me, and that is the exact opposite of why you lead a ritual. You lead a ritual in service, and Drawing Down the Moon is the biggest service that you can give to a coven in a lot of ways, because you're surrendering yourself for the good of everyone that is there.
Right.
And when you have a drawing down experience, most of the time you're not going to remember it anyways.
Right.
That's when you know it really worked. When when people are telling you
explicitly get nothing out of this process.
Yeah.
No memories, nothing.
I remember the first time I fully drew down a deity. It was Dionysus, and when the ritual was over, people were like, wow, that was so great. You were so witty and charming. And then you kissed so-and-so and stuff. And I'm like, I don't remember any of that. Because I'm not witty or charming. And that young lady would have never kissed me under any other circumstances. But with D in there, it's like, yeah, Dionysus, baby. And we had a chat after that. Like, if you're going to do that, you got to let me have some of that memory, buddy.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, what is the next book that's on the docket? I think I know, but...
It's already on Amazon right now. Yeah. The Witch's Wheel of the Year.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Rituals for covens, circles, and solitary. I was at Arts and Crafts 2 years ago, which is a great witch store in Michigan. And
our listeners are familiar.
Yeah.
Very familiar.
People are like, what are you writing next? What are you going to do? And when are you writing your ritual book? I got that one that day, and I was like, filing that away. So this was the ritual book. So it's 3 different Sabbath rituals for every Sabbath. This book is, I don't like to quote Cartman from South Park, but this book is hella long. And so it's 3 rituals for every Sabbath, each tailored for either a solitary, a coven, or what I call a circle, which means a large group. Like a group maybe over 25 or 30, up to maybe a couple hundred. And it has histories of the Sabbath in there, do's and don'ts for leading different kinds of rituals, a history of the Wheel of the Year and why we call things Mabon and Ostara,
Right.
Even though those aren't real holidays from a historical perspective. And that's the book, and I wrote it really fast. It was a strange writing process. I sent the proposal in March 2018, and Llewellyn sat on it, and I said, well, I'll probably publish it. I'm going to start writing it in April. When I don't hear anything, I'm like, they're not going to publish this, so maybe I'll do other things. And then my wife and I went to Greece in May on vacation. And we're sitting there in Athens, I think, or somewhere, and I get the email, oh yeah, we're going to publish your book. And the date I'd put on it, thinking I was going to start in late March or April, was September 15th.
Wow, that is a fast turnaround.
And so that would have been like, fast, but extra months of time.
Sure.
So I really didn't start it until June. So I really had about 3 months and a little bit of change to write the whole book.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a process.
Yeah.
Because it was just exhausting. I'm just so fucking tired of writing right now.
When is that one coming out?
It should be out in November of this year, December.
Fabulous.
I thought it might be out a little earlier than that, but Amazon lists a date of like the first week of December.
Okay.
Then usually that's right. Llewellyn never tells you. You just find out by like going to Amazon. It'll tell you how many.
When is my book coming out?
It'll tell you how many pages your book is on there because you have no idea, and it'll tell you when it's coming out. So it's like 500 pages, and it's coming out in December.
Nice little service Amazon provides.
Yeah. Usually, though, they let you see your cover art before it's on Amazon.
Right.
And you don't really have a whole lot of control over your cover art as a Llewellyn author. I mean, that's their job to market books.
Right.
Sure,
So you trust them. Usually that goes really well. I love Transformative Witchcraft, the cover of that. And that was an idea that Ari and I had. And then the Witch's Wheel of the Year was pretty obvious. Obviously, you're going to have a Wheel of the Year on it.
Yeah.
Right.
But they did a tremendous job with the cover of that book. It is
Fabulous.
Absolutely beautiful. When you buy it, you can just buy it for the cover to stare at.
Rip the cover off.
And put it on the
Frame
wall.
it.
Frame it. Always frame it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then buy.
Actually, just frame the whole book and buy a copy to read.
There you go.
You should have a copy just to gaze at lovingly, and then a copy to read.
Yeah.
There you go.
And that nets me $2 if you buy it twice. So I mean, that's good
If
money.
you're lucky. Yeah.
I think about $1 a book is what we writers get. So so you're really doing me a solid there. It's like half a cup of coffee if you buy 2
There
cups.
you go.
Well, I think that's it. Are we wrapping up?
I think so.
I think
Questions?
so.
Do you have anything more you
you
want
have
to
any
say?
questions?
About your book?
Any final thoughts?
I mean, I could talk about myself for hours. I mean, and you all are really fun to talk to, so this has been really great.
Oh,
Sometimes you do podcasts and like people don't know what to ask you, and then there's like the awkward silence in the middle, or they don't ask you questions, they talk about themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And then have like maybe a yes or no question at the end.
No.
So
Well,
you
the
all
good
are
news
great
for
at
you
this.
was that Gwyn is a published author, And so
she knows the kind of questions.
I know what you're gonna ask. I understand, and I understand your struggle, and you're a little bit of burnout.
Yeah, I really regret saying I would write 2 more books this year. I'm like really mad at myself. Like I should have just taken more time off.
Yeah.
Well.
Sometimes you got to
recharge the brain cells.
The well has to fill back up.
Yeah.
You know, the well is a little empty.
The fallow periods, as we are always telling our listeners,
Yeah.
are just as important as the fertile ones.
That's right. Well, you certainly poured your heart into this one. It's obvious, and it's very, very good. And I highly recommend it to anybody.
Yes,
Thank you.
And everybody.
It's really gratifying when people say nice things about your work. I'm terrified of people reading my books. I'm always like thinking the words, they're all going to hate it. You know?
Well, I think that's just part of being an artist, no matter what kind you are. Whether you're an author or a musician or an artist.
Yeah.
You always think, oh, well, my work's crap. Everybody's going to hate it.
Well, you get attached to it, too. I mean, it's a labor
put a lot
of
of
love.
energy
into it.
Exactly.
It's a little baby, you know. It's my little baby book.
That's right.
Except it's not a baby. It's huge.
That's true. Okay, so here's a question. Are you going to be leading ritual and doing classes here at Convocation? What are you doing
I know
here
you have plans.
Well, Convocation is a great festival. That's where we are right now,
Yep.
if you're listening. And they always treat me really well. I've been a featured presenter at Convocation since really before I moved to California. But now they pay for my hotel room, and I get free. I always got free admission because I taught, but now they take care of me in a really great way.
That's awesome.
And so I'm going to teach 4 classes this year. I was going to do a ritual. I usually do a ritual at Convocation. And usually it takes me forever to think of it. And I'm like, just leave a blank space. And in like December, I'll have thought of the ritual. The people doing programming this year were like, no. No, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. We don't trust you that much. I'm like, I have a great track record. They're like, no. And so just give us another workshop. So I have 4 workshops. One on the Great Rite, which is actually tonight.
Oh, cool.
Which is obviously from the book. One on initiations and elevations. Again, an infomercial for the book. One on Drawing Down the Moon, which is one I've done a lot of times, but there's new information in it because of researching the book. And then the 4th one is about different kinds of witches today, and looking at what is traditional witchcraft and where did those people come from, and who are the authors in that genre, and kind of going through all the different sort of witchcrafts. Because right now we are really in this era of many witchcrafts. Mm-hmm. There's obviously Wiccan witchcraft, which even people who are like, I don't do Wicca, but you call 4 quarters and cast a circle.
So you do
You're
a little.
pretty much...
You derive a lot of things from it.
You don't want to call it Wicca, that's fine, but you're really mostly doing Wicca. And then, the traditional witches, but there's also kind of this new aesthetic witchcraft, which you see on Instagram, which is really, I'm doing a picture of it, I'm doing a spell, and here's a picture, but it's witchcraft without goddesses and gods, no deity. It's really solitary.
It's basically what Gwyn does.
Yeah.
It's real, but it's really a different sort of witchcraft. And the books that people are reading who follow that sort of witchcraft on Instagram, they're not books by Llewellyn, they're not books by Weiser, they're books by authors most of us don't read. And the people who are practicing that sort of witchcraft aren't coming to festivals like Convocation. So it's really different, and
it's evolving into like a completely separate ecosystem.
Exactly, that's perfect.
So I'm not completely like that, because I didn't even...
You had the background.
I had the background of Wicca and traditional witchcraft before I started kind of doing green witchcraft, kind of something separate.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So that's what that workshop touches on.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's very interesting.
We'll see if it's any good.
So, thank you very much, Jason Mankey, for being with us on.
We really appreciate your time.
This has been a pleasure.
Thank you all. This has been fun.
You've been listening to 3 Pagans and a Cat. Find out more information at www.3pagansandacat.com.